Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/359, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 359th edition of the Pedalshift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, we are doing a special episode talking all about urban bicycle touring and how you can plan your urban adventure. Now, for many of you, I know this is not going to be a thing that you're interested in at all. Many of you are into bike packing, getting out on a trail, going out on a dedicated bike path like the C&O or any of the other wonderful ones that are around the country and around the world. That makes perfect sense to me. For other people, though, I think that you're going to find yourself in cities or suburbs at some point on your bicycle travel adventures, even if it's just your initial arrival or departure from a city or a suburb or something along those lines. And so I do think that there are tips and tricks to all of this. Of course, as my travels have evolved over the years. It used to be very pavement oriented and then became very trail oriented. And now it's a little of everything. And as a result, I think that I've got some thoughts and maybe some tips for you on what it means to do some kind of bicycle travel adventure that includes or is dominated by cities and suburbs. Of course, my Florida trips are probably the best example of all of this. But, even the Oregon trips, the Oregon coast trips, the California trips, they all have quite a bit of this type of riding. And I think that it's different, of course, compared to sort of backcountry stuff like the C&O and the Gap and all those other types of trips that I've taken you along the ride for. And I think it's worth talking about them in a standalone episode for this week. So we're going to start off talking about how you would want to plan any kind of an adventure that includes city riding. And I think that where it begins for me is the route planning. Very often, the resources that we have available to us really do all the heavy lifting for any kind of route planning within an urban area. And that is because more and more cities have dedicated bike infrastructure that effectively sort of create grooves for us to travel in. It just makes it a lot easier for us to get through a city or around a city or include a city as part of our adventure because that infrastructure is there. And the nice thing about bike infrastructure is that it tends to attract the kinds of things that we need as cyclists, especially long-distance cyclists. Bike shops, if you're into it, breweries, they often tend to be somewhat nearby, and restaurants and ice cream and all the things that can calorie us up for our rides. And I think that that's really helpful. I think we're also starting to see more and more lodging options that are starting to be attracted to these places. And some of them may be campsites, but some of them might be hotels or Airbnbs or things like that too. So I think that that's all really handy. So I think the first thing that I would say in terms of your planning is that your route is going to end up determining a whole lot for you. But the other thing that I would say is that you don't want that to be the be all and end all for your ride. I mean, very frequently I have started with what is the bike infrastructure looking like in a particular place. And then I've looked up things that I'm interested in going to see. And I'll give you an example for an upcoming trip that I think may make the podcast. I'm not 100% sure. I'm going to be going to Boston to teach at a university you have heard of. We'll talk more about that later. And I was thinking, oh, wow, Boston, I don't know much about, like at all. But I do know that there's bike infrastructure. So I did a little bit of research and found that all out. I know where I have to go to teach. I know where my hotel is going to be. And then I was like, oh, well, do I bring my Brompton or is the bike share good? Well, the bike share is really, really good. And just by the nature of my flight, bringing my Brompton's not as good because I'll be on JetBlue, which is not great for Bromptons for a variety of reasons. So I'm going to utilize Boston's bike share. Then as part of my research, it was more about, okay, what do I want to do? And I thought, well, I wouldn't mind grabbing a beer. I've got to teach on one day remotely, and then the next day I'm teaching in person. So I thought, okay, well, in between, I've got some time. Maybe I want to go to try out some of the different breweries that are in Boston. So I plugged that into kind of my research wormhole, as it were. Also, I was sort of like, oh, I know that there's some pretty famous comic book shops up in Boston. I thought, oh, well, that would be an interesting thing to go see. I don't go to comic shops very often, but there are some pretty famous ones. And I thought, okay, well, that might be something else to do. Enter in the things that are interesting to you that you might want to see. And I was able to use that to come up with a pretty fun itinerary. By the way, one thing that was very helpful in all of this is using ChatGPT and some of the AI tools that are available. They are pretty fantastic. Now, the one thing that I thought was really awesome at first was I had it create an itinerary so that I asked it to make it in a logical pattern. Well, when I looked at what it gave me, it said that it was, oh yeah, we're minimizing backtracking. And of course, it wasn't minimizing backtracking at all. So it's another gentle reminder that AIs are not exactly Jarvis. They are not super smart. They are language models. And sometimes they will give you garbage information back. But it was information nonetheless. And so I just reordered it and it became a kind of a nice little itinerary for me. So utilizing obviously Google and Maps and word of mouth and blogs and other things like that about the city that you're going to, all very important. But then linking it together, utilizing the city's own bike infrastructure is just a really great way to handle all of that. And I will have to say, just again, I'll be speaking a lot about Boston just because that's been the city that I've been most planning about. The infrastructure is great, and the routes are really pretty interesting looking for a city that has a very non-grid based system, unlike the city that I'm used to in DC. And of course, New York City is another one that I'm fairly familiar biking around a little bit. Boston is wackadoodle, as you New Englanders all know. So it'll be really fun to try something new and to hit the things that I'm most interested in just by doing a little bit of research on all of that. And one other thing that's, I think, important is to really start to get to know the area ahead of time if it's a really unfamiliar urban setting. This is where we get into the planners versus non-planners thing. I think it's real important to have a little bit of a more planning in an urban environment, but just because things are happening around you very fast. And I've used the phrase head on a swivel a lot when talking about urban bicycle riding. Because things happen so fast and it's very easy for you to miss a turn, sometimes your instincts are to do stupid things. And I think doing stupid things can get you into trouble when you are in that kind of an environment. We're talking, you're sharing the roads with a lot of vehicles and a lot of stuff going on. So I do think a little bit of pre-knowledge research about what the routes are going to look like and what there is to expect. I've talked about before how I like to use Google Street View to get a visual beforehand. I can't tell you how many times that has been really, really handy when I get to the place in real life and go, oh, this is familiar to me. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I'll give you an example. In the Florida trip that we just did a couple of months ago, as I'm sitting here, there was a time when I was going a little bit off of the path that I was on, the C2C path, and I was going to a local deli that I ended up giving 44 stars to, of course. It was a very confusing interchange because you had to go underneath a highway, but it was all there and there were sidewalks, but you had to cross the roads in weird ways to maintain yourself on the sidewalk and to get on the right side of the road that you needed to get to the place that I was heading for. And the fact that I did all of that planning with Google Street View first, it was all very familiar to me. I wasn't looking around trying to figure things out on the ground. I was able to do it literally weeks ahead of time. And so when I got there, it was like, oh yeah, all very familiar. Oh, I recognize this. Boom, boom, boom. And it was all fine. And it was very safe in what otherwise might have been a really kind of dodgy area where there were a lot of on-ramps to highways and things like that. You may find that in a lot of cities too, because you've got very busy roads. You may have on and off ramps to highways or other similar types of stroads, as it were, for those types of areas. So I think a little bit of that is really important. All right, let's pivot a little bit to choosing the right bike and the right gear for any kind of a bit of bike travel that is an urban adventure. And I think that the ultimate thing here is you want to be flexible. I also think that you need to be flexible in how you carry your gear as well. The most important thing that I found with urban kind of stuff is security of my gear. I will start off, and I've said this on other shows about security and worrying about getting stuff stolen off your bike. For the most part, I don't worry about my gear being taken. In an urban environment, it would be probably the opposite of that. I think that in urban environments, the odds of stuff walking off of your bike are just a lot higher than in some rando place out in the country. It's just, that's just the reality of how cities are. So I think that you want to think about your bicycle travels in urban environments a little more carefully. Now, do I lock my bags to the bike or anything like that? Absolutely not. No. But I do choose where I stop much more carefully. And in the city environments, quite frankly, real true cities, I don't leave my bike alone at all. I choose other places to stop. But if you are going to be moving about and you do need to carry things with you on your person away from your bike, you need to start thinking about how that's going to look and feel. Now, that may be something as simple as you have a backpack or you have a pannier with a shoulder strap or anything like that. And you throw the most important things in your bag with you and you leave whatever isn't on your bike, or you take it all with you and you lock your bike up really, really good. I think that's probably the best way to approach it. Now, when you're going to be thinking, okay, I'm going to be physically carrying my stuff with me, well, then you got to be mindful of how much stuff you're bringing too. So depending on the nature of your visit to a city, you may need to rethink about what you're bringing in total, even if you're going to be doing some camping later on. I know a lot of people that do the Pacific Coast route and end up in San Francisco find themselves in a bit of a conundrum because they've got all the camping gear and they're rocking at least 2 and sometimes 4 panniers and a handlebar bag and whatnot. And they hear all the rumors about bike theft in San Francisco, which are completely true. It is a very high bike theft city, as is Portland, as is a bunch of places, as is DC is too. So the idea here is, okay, how do you handle all that? And that gets into maybe some other things that we're talking about later and talking about accommodations. Maybe you end up with a roofed lodging situation on those nights. And the first thing you do in that city is you get your bike inside into a safe place. That's another way to handle all of that. So what gear you bring and what bike you bring, so we're going to pivot to that, matters for that too. All of these things interrelate with each other, I tend to find. So depending on your scenario, you may choose to do a folding bike if that's something that's an option for you. Or you may find that you need to think a little bit more about how clean your bike is going to be coming into a city. If you're out in the mud for a lot and you're going someplace, they may not let you take your bike inside to roofed lodging opportunities unless you have a way to rinse it all off. I'm thinking of, there's a hotel right in Cumberland, Maryland at the end, literally the end of the trail there, the C&O trail, and they have a bike wash station. So they have accommodated for that, but you may not have that in your particular place. So lots of different things that you have to think about, but I would say that in terms of urban riding, you have the most freedom in terms of what bike you end up choosing because it's going to be pretty decent infrastructure in most places that you end up. Now, I'm talking very much from a North American perspective right here. I think in Europe, it's probably even better. In other countries, there may not be good infrastructure in cities. Who knows? My partner just got back from Indonesia, and I have no concept of what the bicycle infrastructure would be in Jakarta or even in some of the more remote places that she went to. My best guess is that there's probably none in those more remote places, and I have no idea what Jakarta would be like. So again, this is another area where you want to be doing your research and know what is going on in the cities and suburbs that you're going to. So a little bit chaotic there, a lot of different choices that are available to you, but they're interrelated with some of the other things that I'm talking about. So let's talk a little bit about navigating. I made a reference earlier to route planning, and of course that's going to inform your navigation in terms of the big picture. But I do think that you have to have a point of view and you have to have a plan and you have to have a good mentality when it comes to navigating when you're there in real life. I think that the best word that I can use here is confidence. And sometimes it's really hard for folks who aren't used to riding in cities to have, because I think confident riding is the thing that makes you the most safe. The big ticket thing there is knowing exactly where you're going to go and how you're going to go. I think that just winging it in cities is a recipe for, I don't want to say disaster, but I'm just picturing New York City right now. I think that especially in larger cities, those bike lanes are being used by a variety of people, including delivery riders and all sorts of folks, commuters that are trying to get someplace. And if you're just la-di-da, especially in the middle of rush hour, that is going to create a lot of stress for you and perhaps for other people as well. So it's real important that you have a sense of where you're going. Speaking of that, I think timing your riding is probably pretty smart too. Rush hour in any city is a drag to be in no matter what kind of vehicle you're using. But if you're on a bike and bike lanes, it's a thing. Trust me. You definitely want to be mindful of all of that, because some of you may be like, some of you may fit into this. You may experience this, or you may be this person. People are a little bit salty for folks who are getting in their way or a little bit slow on their way home or to work. It happens. I've seen it. I live it. I have almost nothing of a bike commute, but I am on a fairly robust portion of a bike commuting route. And yeah, people going home especially are very salty if you're not playing the game and going the speed that you need to. Not everywhere, of course, but here in Type A DC, that's certainly the case. I think I want to spend the most time in this section, though, talking about strategies for dealing with traffic and busy intersections. And I think that I have demonstrated this in the tour journals a lot, but it's worth talking about here. The first thing I'll say about traffic is if you've got separated infrastructure that's really physically separated, well, then traffic for motor vehicle traffic is not that big of a deal. But traffic around other bicycles could be, especially now that we're seeing more and more e-bikes coming into the picture here in cities, for delivery riders and commuters too. So the speed differential is all very much there too, but that's certainly not just the fault of e-bikes. I mean, I definitely see a whole bunch of people who are Lance Armstrong types who want to go super fast, and bike courier types that want to go super, super fast. I don't want to throw any particular type of group under the bus there. And you'll get passed a lot, and that's okay too. Especially if you're fully loaded, you're definitely going to be slower than a lot of folks. And take that in stride. I notice myself that when I get passed a lot, for some reason, I'm thinking I'm doing something wrong. And the answer is no. Ride your ride. Riding your ride is really important, but you want to ride your ride within the framework of what is expectations within a bike lane. So don't weave in and out. Don't go side by side with somebody in an urban bike lane. No, it's single file. Leave room for people to pass. If you're going to pass, make sure you follow whatever the local conventions are. Sometimes it's ringing a bell. Sometimes it's announcing. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's lots of different things that are there for you. But be mindful of all of that and interact with other cyclists in a positive way. As far as busy intersections go, this is another thing that I feel like that I've demonstrated a few times here on the show, and that is, don't be afraid to, first of all, follow whatever the infrastructure is. If there are cyclist lights and other types of traffic signaling specifically for cyclists, follow them, learn them, understand them. Here in DC, we utilize the pedestrian walk lights as our stop and go lights in many portions of our infrastructure. So that may not be the case everywhere, but it certainly is here. Other places in DC have actual green and red lights that have little cyclists as part of it. And those are designated traffic signals for cycling. Follow them, know them, understand them. In other places, it may be different. So you will want to make sure that you're researching all of that. Absent specific cycling traffic direction, what I tend to do, especially if I am in very busy areas, and Florida is popping to mind right now. When I was on that US 192, for instance, I was on whatever bicycle infrastructure was available to me. But frequently what would happen, especially when you were looking at crossing major roads or major highways, that bicycle infrastructure sort of peters out. And also, you will find yourself being exposed to a right hook from people who are turning right when you are thinking of going straight. So what I do very frequently in those instances is I will end up in the sidewalk or on the sidewalk, or more importantly, utilizing the crosswalk and the crosswalk signals. Now, that doesn't mean that you are immune from getting right hooked at that point. It just means that you are outset a little bit more. And in many instances, that pedestrian signal is going to be before the turn signal happens. But that is the most common place I think that you have for exposure to danger. So you do want to be really, really mindful, be very visible, and be very careful as you start to venture out, particularly if you notice that there are motor vehicles that are going to be making a right onto the road that you're occupying. That's the most important thing. Honestly, I would much rather, if I'm making a left from a busy road to a busy road, I will absolutely go crosswalk, and proceed then, rather than try to end up in the left turn lane. I can do that from time to time. It all depends on how busy the road is. But if you're going to be making a left where you're going to be waiting on oncoming traffic coming and you don't have a left turn arrow, that's definitely a time when I am looking at doing a crosswalk to crosswalk type of situation. Again, these are traffic rules that apply in North America. They may not necessarily apply in other places. I just realized that I also was talking about turning left with the context of driving on the right side of the road, which I know is not everywhere. Hello, rest of the world that does not do that. Many parts of the world do that. So flip it around for you. But the idea here is to be prepared and utilize pedestrian infrastructure when it is appropriate and when it makes you safer. I think that is a huge piece to navigation in urban environments and in suburban environments too. I'll be honest, it doesn't have to be in a city. It can be in a suburb, and even more so with those intersections there. I just think that when you're in the suburbs, sometimes people don't think to look for cyclists. And that can be a really challenging thing, particularly if you're in an area where there's maybe some cycling infrastructure and it's just not utilized all that much. That's a really, really important thing. Utilize those pedestrian infrastructure items when it is appropriate. Finding accommodations in the urban bicycle travel space, I mean, it's not much different than elsewhere when you're doing it. Sometimes there will be urban camping opportunities. It depends on the city. It depends on where you're going. But sometimes we are seeing that a lot of those places are starting to get shut down the closer they are to cities, because there's a struggle, at least here in the States, and I suspect elsewhere in the world, around balancing access to those types of things and homelessness and how that is affecting things. There are going to be some opportunities for camping even in city limits in a lot of different places. Not necessarily big cities, but I'll give you an example. In New York City, there's no tent camping that I'm aware of that's designated as a campground that's intended as such that I'm aware of. But there's an RV park right across in New Jersey that I've stayed at with our RV once, with a view of the Statue of Liberty. So yeah, you may be surprised at what camping opportunities there are out there. Some of them may be RV only, but there may be some opportunities for tent camping in places that you don't expect. So take a look. You just never know. A lot of places like DC, I'll use it as an example, the C&O, you do not have to go very far out until you have your first camping opportunity. So you could take advantage of it that way. That's another opportunity. There are Airbnb opportunities and other of those kind of vacation rental places and services online where camping in people's yards is a possibility. Warm showers is certainly a possibility for things like that. There are a lot of warm showers hosts who say, you can absolutely pitch your tent in my yard. That is what they're offering. So that's another type of opportunity for you as well. Then you get into the stuff, the roofed lodging that might be the kinds of things that you might expect. And I will say for most people who are on longer trips, when they go into cities, that's their opportunity, or that's when they take the opportunity to go for the unroofed lodging, to get a night in a real bed, to get a good shower, to be able to do laundry, things like that. It may be that that's the time where roofed lodging is really worth it to you. It also gives, as we talked about before, a little bit of a callback, a more secure place to keep your bike and your stuff. So hotels, hostels, rentals, those are the types of places that I think are opportunities for you. And there are some bike-specific ones that may be available for you too. So do the research, do the Googling, and find resources that can talk about all of that. I don't have any problem doing a roofed lodging night in any of my trips. Some of my travels are exclusively roofed lodging, and I don't apologize for that, and neither should you. But I do love me some camping. I would prefer to camp whenever I can, and this gets into the opportunities for stealth camping too. Stealth camping is certainly a possibility in a lot of urban environments. I've talked about some strategies here and there about finding places like on the border between public land and private land, places that are what I like to call not illegal. There are some opportunities that are there, but watch out for local and state laws because they may have something to say about that. And I do not necessarily recommend doing anything that's doing stealth camping. I specifically am telling you, do not break any laws. There, lawyer. So accommodations, that's probably the most flexible thing that you've got. Know, of course, that it is almost assuredly going to be your more expensive lodging and accommodations for any part of the tour. Camping in urban environments are going to be more expensive. Hotels and other lodging probably going to be more expensive. When you look at a service like Airbnb and whatnot, and you end up renting a room in a house, I've done that on a few occasions. I've had some really good luck with all of that. I think I would prefer to have my own space and not be in any shared accommodation that's like a hostel. But it's perfectly fine and certainly a good way to save some bucks if you need to. All right, so you're in the city, you've done it, I say city, suburb, anything along those lines. You've done a little bit of pre-planning. You've found the things that you want to go visit. You know you want to go hit that local place that is really famous for their burritos, or that particular brewery that you've heard great things about. That's the time to really kind of immerse yourself into the city, the culture. I've had some really, really fantastic travels and sort of random interactions with people, probably the most in these urban type of environments. When you sit down for a beer and you're at a bar and you sit next to somebody, that's a natural place to end up sharing stories and whatnot like that, especially once they realize that you came in on a bike. But, you've got local drinks, you've got local cuisine, art. Sometimes you'll stumble on an event that's going on in town. That's the best part right there. When you get a little bit of happenstance, do your planning, but sometimes you will find those particular cultural events that are happening that you weren't expecting. I've had some of my best experiences in cities like New York, in Tampa, especially Ybor City, which was just fantastic. San Francisco, of course. LA was such a revelation over the last 10 years or so, especially back in 2014 when I was sort of going, riding across Los Angeles County is going to be terrible. And I found it was one of my most favorite days of that entire tour down the entire West Pacific coast in the U.S. Sometimes you find yourself surprised by what you think might not be so fun. San Diego's another great example. I stumbled upon live music and all sorts of other things when I was riding through San Diego. So a lot of different places. If you are resistant to this kind of stuff, you may find yourself surprised at how much you end up liking it. I know I'm not resistant because I do live in a city most of the time, but I have found myself when I'm like, this is not going to be as fun. Sometimes I find myself having the most fun because of the nice, pleasant surprises meeting up with the fact that I did enough planning to keep myself safe as I was riding. So that's something that I think is a really important thing, is to immerse yourself. Don't be afraid to stop, especially at a place that has a good, safe place for your bike, and enjoy whatever it is that is attracting you. It could be a place where there's outdoor seating and it's a burrito stand, or a brewery where there's a bunch of people with bikes and it seems like a pretty good bike-friendly place. Take advantage of all of that. You'll make your miles. Don't worry about it. But you may never be able to go back there again. You certainly will never be able to go back there again on that particular trip, perhaps. So take advantage of it. Immerse yourself. Last but not least, I want to talk about some of the challenges. I mentioned them a little bit here and there. Of course, theft concerns, bike security. Some people will throw personal safety into all of this. I am a resident of a fairly decent-sized city here in the U.S. I don't have the same types of personal safety concerns that somebody who doesn't live in a city has. And that is because it's just exposure, right? I'm used to what I see and what I experience. I think a lot of folks come into cities and they're not used to the vibes of what they see, the humanity, some of the rougher things. Like you're going to see some folks walking around with experiencing some mental health difficulties, and you're going to experience situations where you see folks who are not living in homes, or not living in houses, I should say. They have a home someplace. It just might be a tent. A lot of folks will throw around the term bad part of the city or whatever, and that's going to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It may be real. It may be hype. I do not want to discount the fact that sometimes cities have pockets of places that are not super friendly and might be a little bit on the dangerous side of things. But I do want to let you know that if you get a lot of your information about cities from cable TV, you are being sold a very different story than what is the reality. All right. So I think that the biggest thing that I will say, though, is I as a city resident, should not be telling a person who is not used to living in a city what you should do. Your comfort level should be what guides you. Some of you are just not comfortable coming into a city. I get it. I understand that. I grew up in a suburb when I was a kid. I was a little nervous going into cities when I first started to. And then I went to college in a city. And then I went to law school in a city. And then all of a sudden, cities became very demystified for me. But I'm not going to tell you, if you don't have a lot of experience being in cities and you don't have a comfort level being in there, I'm not going to tell you, you need to ride in a city or you're not a good cyclist. That's just nonsense. You got to ride your ride and you got to do what you want to do. For those of you who are like, this entire episode is not for me, I'm not interested, I get it. Bypass cities, go around them. There's other ways to do it. But I do think that it's worth experiencing in a way, so long as you do it in a safe way that meets your comfort level. I think that cities really bring a lot to the table and can really enhance any kind of bicycle travel that you do. Even if you're going to be doing mostly backcountry, maybe at some point you're going to be, like I said at the top of the show, traveling in or out of a city as part of your travels there. Take some time, check it out, see if there's something cool about it. Because I think that urban bike touring and urban bike riding and urban everything can really add some great flavor to your bicycle travels. So I hope that is helpful for you and in kind of thinking about this, and some of the tips and tricks that I have in there are going to make your next bicycle travel adventure that includes a city that much better.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zaranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullum, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponselli, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Heggie Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Sarus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.